Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be ranking all of the Warzone weapons into individual categories, and then I'm going to be giving you class setups for all of the Warzone meta weapons as we kind of go through that. If you enjoy the video, learn something new, please do me a favor, hit that like button. Goal in today's video is 10,000 likes, so hopefully you can help me crush that number. If you're brand new, looking to find your way back for more Call of Duty content, just double check, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. So I've already broken this into a few different categories, which I generally like to do. There's the Warzone meta, which if you are in upper tier diamond lobbies, this is 99% of what all the players that are using that are on the top end of the lobby. As the lobby tends to die out, these are the people that you're going to see at the top. Everyone is going to be using one of these individual weapons, and there's usually not a lot of them, especially when the meta is as broken as it is. I've already saved a little bit of time by getting rid of some of the other stuff that kind of is a little bit trivial and we kind of know where that's going to go. So I'll kind of beam through these. We've got the AK-47. I think that's viable as an SMG. It would work in this meta. It's just not very practical because we're so used to how the Cold War weapons mobility is, especially with that combat and raider stock that kind of give it better than SMG levels, better than shotgun pistol levels for rifles, and it's completely broken. So this one, it ends up being viable, but I probably wouldn't recommend it because the current AK is superior in almost every way in terms of that mobility, at least until there's some kind of change to the mobility. Then SMGs will maybe rise up. So I'll go ahead and put that as viable. You can definitely get away with using it as more of like an SMG with the 40 round mag. Otherwise, it's going to be way too slow. AMAX has been meta. I don't think it's going to ever go anywhere because they're never going to probably touch it. It can be a little tricky to use because it has a little bit slower fire rate, so it's a little bit more unforgiving. But if you hit shots, it packs a punch. We have the AN-94. I would say that's viable. Some people really do vibe with it, but you never see it because it does have an incredibly slow fire rate when you subtract that hyper burst that's at the beginning. AS-Val, very good, top tier vial, especially in solos. 30 round mag, a little hard for some people, especially if you miss some shots. The TTK drops off dramatically since you need that upper chest shot, but it is top tier viable. You will delete people when you come into a 1v1. 3v1, you might get caught reloading, even with sleight of hand. AUG, this one is definitely viable. It would be top tier viable if it wasn't so dang slow. It is one of the slowest SMGs when you put on that 5.56 ammo, especially when you put on the big ammo. And then you're kind of left like, well, what can I equip? The iron sights are clean, but I'm not going to use this for 300 meters, 100 meters, or whatever. It just bullet velocity doesn't compete because it's an SMG. And that's kind of where you ended up. It's too slow to be top tier viable, but it's definitely viable. It will put down some shots. AX-50, definitely top tier viable. It would be meta if there wasn't so many great alternatives. Obviously, it kind of fits in the middle between the Kar 98 and the HDR, but the gun that does it better in the middle is the SPR. So it's like, why use that when you can use the SPR or the HDR or, you know, the Kar 98? It's just kind of one of those things. Bison, I would say not recommend. You have the Bullfrog. It's better in pretty much every way. The Bullfrog is going to be top tier meta, almost meta. Bruin is still very good. It's top tier viable. It has the mobility on its side. Its recoil is really low, easy to use. Damage profile is pretty consistent. Dragunov, would not recommend. I know a lot of people get hyped about this. Oh, it's 2 shots to the body, but it's pretty difficult to hit those shots. The bullet velocity isn't nowhere near some of the other sniper rifles. It's just not a practical gun. We got the EBR. I think the EBR could be viable if it wasn't sniper ammo, so I'm going to put would not recommend, even though it still has that 2-shot kill potential. You reload once, you basically are burnt through all your ammo, especially considering the fire rates are as good as them. You just spam and you're out of your ammo. FAL is actually viable, I would say, if it was a little bit more easy to use. It does have a little bit more kick, even though it's manageable. The trigger cap and, you know, all these different variables that go into it, it makes it a little harder to use for most players. So very skilled players can pull that off, but I'm not going to put it in most people's hands and they're going to do well with it. It just doesn't work out that way. FR would not recommend unless somebody's unplated. You happen to be close. This is a floor loot weapon. They don't have plates. Maybe you win that engagement. You put it into semi-auto, it becomes very viable. I would say in semi-auto it moves up, but in general I don't really like it. Fennec is cool. In solos you can get away with it. It's definitely viable, but you're better off maybe even using the AS-Val. FFAR is totally broken. We have that going on. LMG Finn, people really like it. I hate it. I think it's like an M13, but it feels weaker and has a slower reload. It just doesn't feel great to me when I use it, and I'm just not a fan. I'd rather use a Bruin if that was the case. It's definitely viable though, because it's super easy to use, but more often than not, you go against anyone that knows how to shoot, you're probably going to get killed because they can kill you significantly faster than you can with them. Growl, always top tier viable because the TTK is pretty easy to use. It's not meta, it doesn't kill fast enough, but because of how easy it is to use, and it does have great mobility, low recoil, decent magazine, a lot of variables going for it, where it ends up being a very good option. You're just not going to see a lot of people use it just because the current meta kills way faster if you have any kind of gun skill. We have the HDR. I would say that this is meta in competitive Warzone because you're going to be hitting people at significant distance. If you are playing from power positions, HDR is definitely the way to go, but it is currently not the meta because there's so many other snipers that kind of fit in and end up being top tier viable. I think it's borderline meta. It's just not quite used as often because you have to have a specific play style to fit using the HDR, which is hitting people at 500 meters. Not always going to be the case when you're playing Warzone. Then we have the Holger. Not a fan. I think it is viable. It kind of sucks, in my opinion. I don't like it. It's an LMG. If you stack it like a rifle, it doesn't have enough ammo. So I'm going to say would not recommend, even though it could kill rather quickly. ISO, it's viable. It's like a weak MP5. Jack 12, I think it's top tier viable. The auto attack sprint, having the full auto, the damage range, the TTK, the fire rate, everything builds together to be a good weapon. Then we have the Kar 98K, automatically Warzone meta. That is like the number 3 used weapon right now behind the FFAR. And the AUG are the top 2. So obviously those are going to be meta. Kilo, I think Kilo, it's still viable for the same reasons that the Growl is. But the Growl has a little bit better TTK. So I would probably say the Growl is slightly ahead of the Kilo, even though the Kilo is incredibly easy to use. Again, you run into the issue where you can hit every bullet and you still die. You end up in a bad spot. M13, definitely viable. It fires bullets really fast, so it's very forgiving. But because it fires so fast, you need to land so many shots. The TTK's decent, but you have to land so many shots that you're going to miss something. And unless you're close and you can land headshots, it doesn't really compete with the 60 round mag. Then we have the M19. These are definitely viable, almost top tier viable. Just people don't realize how good they are with the current meta because we don't have like a rifle meta. If this was a Kilo SMG meta, I think we'd see a lot of these. As soon as this FFAR gets nerfed, I think this one's going to end up bumping its way up, especially in the akimbo format. Maybe this is the wrong one. I'm thinking this is maybe the X16. I'm thinking the M19. Either way, the M19 is the one I mean for this particular one. Only benefit of these is if you can put them in your you can put them in your ghost class, restock class, so they're fully loaded, so that if you pick up SMG ammo, it'll already be stacked there. Kind of hard to tell off that image. I'm pretty sure that's the X16 though. So I'll go ahead and put that as viable right there, just because in Kimbo the TTK is still decent. It just sucks that the FFAR kills so quick that it doesn't allow anything else to shine. We have M4. That's always top tier viable. It just doesn't really have a blend. It kind of fits in the middle where it's almost not good enough to be like super consistent laser accurate at range for most players. And its TTK isn't good enough to compete with its stuff up close. It kind of has that middle niche where like you want to pair a weapon with it, but then you're going to have a weakness. So it works pretty good. And I'll have a lot of fun using it. It's just kind of balancing it and where it fits in the meta is the struggle. The M91, I would say it's viable, very slow, good TTK, slower fire rate. MG84 or MG83, I can't remember the name now, but you know which one I'm talking about. The MG from Modern Warfare, I think is definitely viable. It could be top tier viable with a buff. It has horrible mobility, like good iron sights with the specific blueprint. I think it's called the blowtorch. And then we have the carbine. Would not recommend. It takes 3 headshots if someone's fully plated. 3 headshots to down a player. You're not getting a kill there. You're getting lucky if that's the case. Maybe in the gulag you like that weapon, but besides that, not really. The 6, this is regular shotgun. Since this was a slow firing rate, I would not recommend. You could get away with it, but there's other shotguns that do it just as good. MP5, top tier viable. People have slept on it. It never got nerfed. It was in the meta. It's just they added a bunch of broken stuff with Cold War that people don't want to use that. If you're using anything but FFAR, you're probably going to lose a gunfight to something unless you just happen to destroy them before they even see you type of thing. MP7, very viable. TTK isn't good enough up close to compete, especially since the TTKs have come down and become a lot faster. Odin, definitely viable. I don't see it in the top tier category. Its TTK is really good. It's just hard to use. You got to factor that into the equation. Could you get some fast kills with this at range? Could you dominate? Could you get multiple downs? Yes, but Could you do it consistently? And how many people could actually do that? The number's a lot lower, and it has a slow mobility, 30 round mag. If it had a 45 round mag, I think this one would be a little bit higher, better mobility. Then you wouldn't need certain attachments. You could put on a good optic, combine it, like it would be like an AMAX to a certain extent, and it would be a lot of fun to use, but they don't want that to happen, so it hasn't ever changed. Origin, it's still viable, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend. The good thing about it, I mean, Origin is the Origin, but there's better shotguns that have been added. Definitely viable. Again, it ends up with a situation like the MP7. It doesn't really have a place to fit in because TTKs are way too fast up close that even if you land every bullet, even if they're all headshots, you'd probably still lose. PKM, top tier viable. It is one of the best SMGs, it's one of the best LMGs in the game, up there with the Stoner and the Bruin. RPD comes in a little bit lower. The only good thing going for the RPD is the no recoil. R9, it is viable, especially if you're within a certain distance, but you got to be pretty barrel stuffed. And if you have a little delay, you could be in a pretty bad spot. It's still usable, but I'm not really the biggest fan. RAM, still top tier viable, especially in solos, duos. Top tier players can get away with it in trio and quads because it does have a really good fast reload. But it's kind of one of those things where FFAR pretty much does almost everything better. With a little bit more recoil on the FFAR, this one has a little bit less. So I guess it's a little easier to use. Or just for netting in general, just a regular single burst is viable, but I really wouldn't recommend. I'm still putting this other pistol a little bit higher on it, just because it doesn't have the same penalties. They went and nerfed the burst weapons pretty hard, so you don't get as much damage profile, and that's just kind of how it ends up working out. We have the Rytec. I think this is a troll niche weapon. People enjoy it. It has a little bit, it doesn't have a lot of bullet drop, slow bullet velocity. It's kind of weird for shooting vehicles, but it's kind of one of the things. SA-87, viable, but most people aren't going to use it. Scar, it's just not, I wouldn't recommend. It just doesn't really have a place anywhere. Too much recoil, not enough ammo. SKS, it's definitely viable. I think it's really hard to use, but I wouldn't recommend. It ends up with the same EBR situation. It doesn't have the right ammo type. You're going to run out of ammo pretty quick. I would say that the SPR is top tier viable. You just don't see anyone using that hardly, besides the Kar 98. Some people do like that one, and they will mix it out, but the meta currently is Kar 98. It's just kind of separated itself there. The Striker, and the Striker is definitely would not recommend. The TTK is just too slow. It gets beat out. Uzi, same situation. It is viable with the 32 AE rounds, but that's primarily in SOs, duos. Same reason like the AS Val. It can hang, but it doesn't kill quite as quick as the AS Val. It's not as forgiving. Doesn't have the ammo, a slow fire rate. At least the AS Val fires fast. If you miss a couple bullets, then at least you can recover. Versus a slower fire rate, you can get penalized pretty hard. Then we have the Rogue shotgun. I would say that this kind of ends up being viable, but I would go ahead and put it as not recommend because of the nerfs. So here is the other one, the M19. This one I would say is the Akimbo top tier viable. And that one is a very fast fire rate. You can end up with a TTK of around 400 milliseconds. Then we have AK-47 here. This one is definitely top tier viable. And as we'll see, once the FFAR gets nerfed, I think more people are going to start using that. Because the Cold War weapons just have too much mobility, and we're going to see kind of how that balances out. AK-74U, it's viable, but it's really not. It has slow TTK. I think it has no recoil, so that helps, but in general, I'll go ahead and put that as a viable. We already know that's broken, needs a nerf, but we'll go ahead and put that at the top anyways. The Bison, the Bullfrog actually, I'll go ahead and put this as top tier viable. I think once this FFAR gets nerfed, it's one of the SMGs that will be a part of the meta. I think it's going to be Cold War MP5, Modern Warfare MP5, Bullfrog, MAC-10. That's going to be like the SMG meta right there. And we're not going to see as many FFAR users. Sigma, I'm going to go ahead and put that down here. That is kind of an annoying one to deal with. Diamati, still viable in a single option. We have the DMR. I would say that it's viable, but it requires a lot of skill. It's nowhere near as easy to use. It takes a lot of shots to down a player. So it's not all that great. FFAR, top tier meta. Even the floor loot one is pretty good. SA-12 Gallo, that is top tier viable, especially in duos up to trios. You just got to be very conscious to either have a throwing knife or not try to thirst your kills with the shotgun. We're in a habit of doing that. We get down and then we try to thirst it. The reload's a little bit slower, so you can catch yourself off guard. But as long as you're focusing on getting the kills, trios and below, this thing is a monster. Groza, still top tier viable. Same scenario we're running with in the FFAR. We're going to see as soon as the FFAR gets nerfed, we see the, what is this? The AUG get nerfed along with the M16. We're going to see those drop down a little bit. And then these ones are going to kind of blend out. Obviously, AMAX and Car 98 will probably still lean towards the top. But I think you're going to see a little bit more versatility in the top tier viable. People are actually going to be using those. It's going to be spread out significantly further. We have another shotgun. I do not like those either, so would not recommend, because the same issue. I think you can finesse. If you got the movement, you can finesse, so it is viable, especially if you get a 2-tap. The range is pretty good, but if you don't get the second tap and you miss part of the shot, it's going to be a third shot and your TTK drops off a cliff and you end up in a pretty bad spot. Frig sucks. I would say it's barely viable. Once they get this optic situation situated where this 3x optic is the same as sniper optics. Keep that in mind. It's Modern Warfare sniper optics, default stuff. So you're getting all this optical zoom and you're not getting the recoil reduction that the VOK had. So in the 2x doesn't zoom in enough, and you end up, that's more like a hollow sight, so it doesn't work for good for those long ranges. So we need something in the middle for Cold War weapons. They just need to go through, fix it. Whatever needs to be fixed, I don't see that ever happening. But that's one of the biggest problems with these guns, is that they become very hard to use. KSP, this thing is trash. It can get some pretty good bursts. It takes 3 bursts minimum. Unless everything's a headshot, it's going to take 3 bursts. So I would not recommend that unless somebody just doesn't have enough plates. M16 is definitely meta. People are either using the AUG or the M16. Really a matter of preference. Some debate about keyboard and mouse and controller. I use both on keyboard and mouse and controller. I think they both felt the same, but I think it's just one of those things that's like, oh, it feels better on that. We have this one here, the M90. I think this is viable, but I would not recommend it. It's really slow. It just sucks TTK wise. So like, is it viable? I would not recommend. I mean, honestly, if it's floor loot, I almost avoid it to a certain extent. And then we have the M82. I would say that's viable. A lot harder to use. Very forgiving because it does have a faster fire rate. Visual recoil is kind of a lot. Bullet velocity isn't the best, but it is kind of it is. Mac 10 is still meta. It's kind of borderline. I don't think people realize it's not as good as it used to be, and it's nowhere near or will ever be as good as it was. I think I would say more top tier meta, but since it is used on such a high rate, I think it ends up being Warzone meta, even though in reality, I really think it's top tier viable. But people do include that in their loadout. So I'll go ahead and include that just because once these nerfs happen, the Mac 10 is not going to get a nerf. It doesn't need one. They destroyed its TTK by changing its range values with the Task Force barrel once they switched over to Season 2 and they updated all the stats and how things worked for SMGs. You just don't get that benefit anymore. So you're not going to be able to, it's not going to be as nearly as versatile as it was. It's a lot harder to use. It's just, we don't realize it yet because the FFAR is so broken. You're not really comparing the Mac 10 to the MP5 or whatever the case is. Then we have the Milano. The Milano is not the great. It's kind of bad. It's viable because it's low recoil, but you're just going to get dumpstered because the TTK is so slow. Cold War MP5, top tier viable, pretty straightforward, kind of explained why. TTK is good, mobility is good because an SMG, get extra 5 bullets compared to the other MP5. It has straight vertical recoil, which the magnitude's pretty extreme, so it's a little harder for people to control. But I think that one is going to be a favorite of a lot of people and should have been for a while. And like I said, we're going to end up with a 4 SMG meta, Mac 10, Cold War MP5, MP5, Bullfrog, and we're kind of set up there. And then there's also going to be some shotguns in the mix as we're seeing here. Pellington, this is definitely top tier viable. It's kind of like a Car 98. If you're tired of using the Car 98, it's nowhere near as good as the Car 98, but it's pretty close. Bullet velocity is good. ADS is okay. Has kind of weird idle sway as all the Cold War weapons go, but that's kind of how it goes. We have the QBZ. This is very low recoil, but I don't think it's worth using. I wouldn't recommend the QBZ. I think most people just know that it has a slow TTK. Very easy use. That's what makes it viable, especially if you're like a bronze or silver lobbies. You could probably get away with it. But if you get into diamond, everyone's killing you with this top row of weapons. RPD, like I said, it is viable. I'm going to say borderline. Like, I really wish, like, I would say almost mid-tier viable. But I know some people like it. But you're better off just using the stoner, and which we're going to see right now. So I'm going to go ahead and put that RPD as viable just because it's super easy to use. TTK is not great. Recoil's good, you know, but it's still an LMG. Stoner ends up taking the top tier viable. Really good, really easy to use, better TTK, better fire rate than the RPD, similar recoil pattern, so it doesn't have a ton. It's just, again, with that trash optics, we can't really get away from those. Street Sweeper, this one's definitely top tier viable. It has a lot of mobility because it's Cold War shotgun, kind of slide in and out of gunfights, and it works really well. Tundra, top tier viable. Right up here with the HDR, again, the optics are what kind of hold that back. And you don't see a lot of people use that. Even if it has no glint, they're more comfortable using the HDR or the Kar 98K or even sometimes AX50. I rarely run into that, but overall, those are kind of the ones I don't see this one uses often, even though it is pretty good. It just kind of has one of those terrible optics that has a decent zoom, but kind of how it goes. Then we have the Type, which I'm going to say is I would not recommend because I obviously put the other one right here. The DMR is just better in every way. They made it better in every way, so there's no reason to use that. Over at XM4, still top tier viable. I'm sticking with that. I think the gun's really good. I think one of the biggest issues holding it back is a stupid optic. And if you run it with the 2X or a SUSAT, 2X works pretty good, but then you don't get any zoom beyond that if you need to like actually zoom in. Bullet velocity is good after all the stat changes. SUSAT is a little bit slow. It does give you that variable zoom effect. 3X is trash though. It messes up so many of the Cold War weapons viability. Then we have the FARA, which the FARA is definitely viable. Based off TTK, I would put it even in top tier viable, but nobody really gave it a chance because what happened is people want to use it like a rifle. They saw the FARA when it was added to the game and they said, hey, you know what? I'm going to use this like the Kilo, like the Grau, like the long range assault rifles that we've had so far. And it just doesn't work. The recoil's too much. It's not very consistent. I don't think even the top keyboard and mouse player is going to be able to manage it consistently. That's the key. Not to be able to do it, but consistently. So on top of that, you're going to have to worry about how you're going to fit into there. And then we have the LC10. I think this it would be top tier viable if the Bullfrog didn't exist, but the Bullfrog kills faster, bigger mag, similar mobility, so it's just not as good as the Bullfrog. Why would you ever choose this over the Bullfrog? Low recoil, Bullfrog's low recoil. That's kind of how you end up. So what we're going to do is give some class setups for these top 5 here. So this ends up being pretty easy because we already got the class setups, so I'll kind of breeze through them. The AUG is the agency silencer, the strike team barrel, field agent grip, 45 round drum mag, because if you equip any of these other ones that are down here, they're going to slow down your ADS and you're not going to really get the benefit of recoil, which is going to put you at a disadvantage. 45 rounds is plenty when it only takes 2 bursts to kill someone, 3 bursts if it's a little bit more than that. You just kind of spam the hell out of this thing, right? You get the axial 3X. You could go with the SUSAT. It gives less visual. Same thing you could do with the 2X. It's not like some secret. It just doesn't really work all that great in consistency terms if you're trying to hit somebody at range because of how much optical zoom this 3X gives. So that's kind of class setup there. FFAR, there's multiple builds. I'm going to run through a couple. We've got the agency suppressor, takedown barrel. This is more of a strafe build that you're running with the support class of a long range option. We've got the field agent grip, 50-pound fast mags, and then the Raider stock. If you're going to be running this with like the Kar 98, for example, you're probably going to go ahead and go put the reinforced heavy. It will slow you down a little bit, but you're going to be using this for a little bit more medium ranges. You're going to have to be able to hit those shots. Still field agent grip. And then if the strafe is a little too fast for you, you can go with the CQB pad, which will help the sprint to fire time, which will help you out a little bit. And so you don't get out of hand when you're strafing. But you can still stick with the Raider stock because it does help with that close range versatility. It just can be a little bit too much for some players. That brings us to the Kar 98, and there's a lot of good builds for the Kar 98. Monolithic suppressor, 27.6 inch tac laser, sniper scope, and the F-Tac sport comb. We could also use the precision comb, and then we also have the perk where you can actually do presence of mind, so that allows you to hold your breath for up to 1 minute, or you can do focusing. So if you're getting shot, you could stick it, and then you can make sure that you line up that shot. So you got a couple different options here. M16 ends up being the same build as the AUG, but we do change one thing because the magazine is bugged. We got agency silencer, strike team, field agent grip, and then we have the 60 round fast mag because it doesn't hurt your ADS speed for whatever reason. Game's broken, like we know. And then we got the 3X, same reason. You could do the SUSAT or the 2X. It will help with the visual recoil. Look like you have no recoil. Look like the bullets going where there are, but you don't get any optical zoom, so it can be very hard to spot people since it's not zooming in all that much. And that leaves us with the AMAX, which is a all-around good gun. We got the monolithic suppressor, Zodiac barrel, commando foregrip, 45 round mag, and whether or not you're going to be using this for close range, medium range, long range, you're going to equip the VLK optic or the Corp Combat Hollow Sight, or you got the other hollow sight down here, which is the PBX hollow sight. So it's really a matter of preference. If you have the time, unlock the blue dot, and that thing is amazing on the holographic, not the VOK. Sometimes people use the cross threat or whatever, the T-pose. So you got those options there. Hopefully you guys did enjoy the video, learned something new. If you did, please do me a favor, hit the like button. If you're brand new, want to find your way back, double check, make sure you subscribe. Appreciate all the support on the channel. Thank you for watching. As always, have a great day.